safety efforts?
I think it's making progress, probably too slow, but the new management is seeking to bring better leadership to the railroad. I have yet to be convinced that there's action to support the very good words we're hearing. There needs to be a commitment not just in rhetoric, but in actual accomplishment. And we have yet to see all of what we need to do to improve safety and reliability. And there is no incompatibility or inconsistency between on-time performance and safety and reliability. So I think there's been a start, but there's still a lot to be done.
What about the call for the New Haven line to be put out to bid? I think O'Shea is calling for that Metro North automatically gets the contract, and maybe it's time for the New Haven line services to be put out for bid. That's not going to happen, but how do you feel about that?
Well, I only know what I've read from the commissioner's comment, which seems somewhat dismissive. I'm open to any idea that improves safety and reliability. And there's certainly logistical difficulties with putting whole management out to bid. But what's really needed is a commitment and a change in culture, top to bottom, as I've said before, an overhaul and reform in the way the railroad does business so far as safety and reliability are concerned. And my hope is that the new management at Metro North, and it still is somewhat new, can provide the much enhanced leadership that is necessary. And the start that we've seen comprises only first steps that have to be made.
So it's like the War Cars Act and the President's proposal,
Yep.
and his proposed limits, which others say isn't the limits. I mean, there really are loopholes, but there's a big approval given in 2001. It's still on the books, or was to be still on the books, and allow him or other presidents to not be so limited in this engagement against ISIL. So I know you have questions about it. To Senator Murphy, and you can elaborate on that.
Yeah. I think Senator Murphy and I share a lot of the same reservations and questions about the draft that the President has submitted, because it leaves many questions yet to be resolved, such as the meaning of enduring offensive operation, to describe the kind of military operation that will not be undertaken. What is offensive, what is enduring, the question of sunsetting obsolete past authorizations. He would sunset the 2002 authorization, but leave in place the 2001 authorization, which is very expansive. And of course, the question about the scope and scale of military operations and American involvement in them. My main reservation has to do with the potential or possibility that the United States would commit combat ground troops, which I would very definitely and strongly opposed. The very welcome feature about the draft is that it's limited to 3 years. That may be the overwhelmingly important aspect of this draft, because it means that Congress is going to have to consider the authorization early in the next president's term. And we're going to have this conversation or debate again at a time when it will be very meaningful and relevant. I applaud the president for submitting the draft, overdue as it may be. I feel there are questions and open-ended areas that need to be addressed, and that's going to be the work that Congress will have to do.
Right, I mean, since a majority Republican Congress at this point, and their concerns is that it's too limited, or a lot of the leaders anyways, it's too limited. Some of them do want combat troops. Someone's talking earlier this morning, like 10,000 troops, that's how it's, that's what it's going to take to actually stop ISIL and the threat of ISIL.
A number of Republicans want 10,000 troops to continue in Afghanistan. Despite the testimony yesterday, and we asked him very repeatedly, General Campbell, the commander in Afghanistan, whether he thought that the present plan would work, and he said yes. But Republican members of the committee, some of them, and there may be some Democrats who want a higher level of commitment in Afghanistan. And more combat troops on the ground against ISIS. You know, one of the powerful truths about the fight against ISIS is that it cannot be won by military force alone, and certainly not from the United States. Ground troops have to be provided by the Arab neighbors who have as much or more at stake. And the solution ultimately has to be regional and local, both political and military. So the focus on the United States military force alone misstates the challenge. I'm a strong believer in the use of American military force to protect U.S. citizens and the U.S. homeland. And so I agree with the president that a plot or operation that is left to go forward by a country where it's ongoing may have to be addressed by United States Special Operation. And we're doing it around the globe to protect our airplanes, our ports, our citizens. We have to address those threats through the use of special operations or drones. And the president said it yesterday when he, or the day before yesterday, I guess it was, when he sent the draft to Congress. And, you know, I think we need to be flexible, nimble, agile. That's why we're downsizing our Army and our Marine Corps as well as other services, but mainly in those areas. And we are training for the continuing conflict, cyber, terrorism, extremism. These are real threats to the United States. And so as a member of the Armed Services Committee, I feel strongly that we need to be ready, prepared, and willing to defend our nation against these real threats. At the same time, no combat troops on the ground, and a realistic understanding that our friends who are in the neighborhood have to be the ones that have combat troops involved, as well as air support.
So, will you vote for it if it's not changed much from when it's, you know, the proposal that's before the Congress now? If they don't, take back the negate essentially the 2001.
I believe it will be changed.
Will it actually take negate the 2001 and a very broad authorization to go after terrorism, for terrorism?
If it's an open-ended, broad enabling authority without limits as to time possibly geography, I would have very strong reservations about it.
But to go as far as to take back the global, it's already on the books essentially, and approve that.
I would not vote for the authorization that was approved in 2002. Again, if
No,
that's what you
but
do.
isn't there a broader authorization already in effect, or continues to be in effect, and that's not being rescinded, essentially?
Well, the president is conducting military operation. That's why I say the authorization, the draft authorization is overdue. The conflict and the operation against ISIS has been ongoing for 6 months.
Right, right. The 2001 was authorized, President, global war against Al-Qaeda and its affiliates.
I think
and that's
that-
still on the books.
And that should be sunsetted.
Okay, right. That's what I mean. If that's not sunset.
That's what I meant. What I meant at the beginning when I was talking about the questions that need to be addressed.
Right.
The president's draft would sunset the 2002 authorization. It would not sunset
Right.
2001, and that's a question that needs to be addressed.
All right. I mean, if that's not sunsetted as part of the ultimate vote that's going forward, would you vote against it?
I'm not going to, predict how I would vote before I see a final draft, but I would certainly have very grave reservations about a final draft that failed to sunset the 2001 authorization, because I think it would, in effect, defeat the purpose of this authorization.
Right. There was a story in the Times this morning too about our role in Afghanistan, and seems to be increasing operations really to help fight the Taliban. Is that going further than what the president said is going on there, or is that something that is to be expected?
Well, I think that the question for me in the Times story was whether U.S. involvement in those special operations was more than just advisory. In other words, whether United States special operators were actually participating in the kinetic activities.
It sounded like, from the story, it sounded like they were. Essentially, they were.
The story certainly made it seem that our special operators there are doing more than simply advising and guiding and helping to provide intelligence. And that's a question that I'm going to raise because we've received assurances that the Afghan special operations are almost entirely done on their own. And as recently as yesterday, I'll have to go back and look at what General Campbell said in his testimony. He certainly implied very strongly that the special operations in Afghanistan are now largely the work of the Afghanistan Special Forces, and that we are playing largely an advisory role.
That's not the case. I mean, can you tell us?
If only because he's provided those kinds of assurances, we'll want to raise those questions. And my guess is that right now, as we speak, the administration is trying to provide some clarification or answers to questions that have been raised.
All right.
But here's the part of the answer to the question. Long term, an effective military strategy in Afghanistan has to include turning over that responsibility to the Afghanistan security forces, whether it's local police or Afghanistan special operators. They have to bear the responsibility for those kinds of operations, just as they do for patrolling and policing and other security functions on the ground throughout the country, because we're going to have diminishing numbers, 5,000 or less, and they simply can't do what they did with tens of thousands before.
All right, on the Ukraine, there is a tentative agreement in place. Again, if you read the details of that, it doesn't sound like either side is really happy with it or confident that it's going to accomplish what it's supposed to accomplish. So I guess the question is, right now, I guess the president has
You're
held
welcome to
off.
take that if you
No,
want.
no, I'm just gonna, should I just hit the settings here? Should I come up with I guess the president is deciding not to go forward with potential for, or sending weapons to that area to help the Ukraine. So I guess
Has
what we-
decided not to go forward?
Not to go forward to hold off on any decision to send weapons
Yeah.
to help Ukrainian government at this point because of the agreement.
Well, publicly, he has made no decision. I continue to believe that we have to provide those kinds of arms. The agreement NIDS 2, Roman numeral 2,
Right.
provides what Ms. Merkel, I think, has rightly characterized as a glimmer of hope, no more than a glimmer. Judging by what Putin has done in the past, he will manipulate this agreement for his own purposes. And he has shown in the past that he basically understands only military or economic force. So my view is that we should be prepared to provide those arms and positioned to deliver them if this ceasefire fails to hold. And we're talking about defensive arms, the Javelin anti-tank missiles, anti-artillery radar, other kinds of equipment that can be used by the Ukrainian army to defend vast swaths of land that have been threatened. And I'm disappointed with some of the terms of this ceasefire insofar as they may well lead to some kind of sovereignty on the part of those areas that have been taken by the separatists. Stopping bloodshed is a good thing, but I understand Mr. Poroshenko's reservations about the terms of the ceasefire.
I mean, they should know pretty quickly, in 2 weeks, they're going to be able to pull back
Right.
major weapons.
And the sheer amount of time involved, I think, is too long.
I mean, ultimately, isn't the agreement to allow the eastern part of the country to potentially be on its own, I mean, to be have more autonomy than it has now? But I guess the way to do it is through elections
As opposed to military force, yeah. As opposed to Russian troops crossing the border with Russian arms and equipment to take over parts of the country and lay siege to towns and terrorize people and cause hardship and death and injury.
Do you know
Thousands of innocent people will die.
Do you know if those weapons are in place? I mean, do we, our policies, I mean, essentially if this falls apart, which could fall apart quickly.
I mean, whether our military aid is in place, I can't tell you. There are different signals coming from the administration. But publicly, as you say, they announced no decision. As far as I know, as we speak.
On the issue of terrorism, is military force ever going to defeat ideological extremism, or are there other steps that need to be taken to try to fight this war?
Well, military force is essential but not sufficient. It will have to be part of a solution in some instances where only military force will stop an imminent and immediate threat. But it will not alone eliminate violent extremism. And that's what I meant earlier when I said there need to be a other measures, largely involving neighbors, people who live in these countries. A number of them have shown a determination to stop extremists that threaten their own stability and security. Egypt, Jordan, others have not. And I think that, programs of education and civilian aid, exchange programs, one of the really dramatic, and this is just a parenthesis in this conversation, but for me, traveling abroad, going to Pakistan and Egypt and Jordan, one of the points made repeatedly to me has been the importance of military to military exchanges, training their mid-level officers. Because when they come to Fort Bragg or our training facilities as mid-level officers, and they learn about our culture and they interact with our military, very often the military in these countries is a source of stability and security, probably the most stable institution, ongoing institution in the country. And so they're educated about what it means to have the military play a limited role in their societies, a stable and secure role, but a military role. They're educated as to what our culture means. And so when the President of the United States calls a general who becomes prime minister or president in one of these countries, there's an affinity that goes beyond just the fact that they're two heads of state. So I think, and this kind of exchange education applies to scientists, to educators, to all, elements of society. So that's just a microcosm of what I mean by the educational function. It's not necessarily setting up a school in those countries, but also exchange programs that enable them to set up schools and train their educators, but also give those educators an insight into what our society means, what a free society means, what civil rights are, what the Constitution is, why the Bill of Rights is important, democratic institutions. And